Greetings, folks. Today I'm going to focus on a couple of verses from our New Testament lesson, also Hebrews, and today's message probably will end this series on Hebrews that I have been presenting. The verses that I want to focus on are chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. Through him, that is, through Christ, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God. That is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do what is good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. We used to sing a song called "We Bring the Sacrifice of Praise." And it was a very upbeat number, and we would sing that song very enthusiastically. Those were in the days when I was more given to exuberant and charismatic worship. We bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. And clearly, the inspiration for that song came from the first of the two verses that I read to you, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 15. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God. That is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. As I've said, it was a very upbeat number, and one could sing it lustily, and it was really appropriate for people for whom life was really good, and people who were feeling grateful and enthusiastic, and things were working well in their lives. And so it was easy to sing this, "We bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord." But of course, sacrifice implies giving up something, denying oneself some pleasure. And so to offer a sacrifice of praise in a context when everything is going well in our lives doesn't really work. Sacrifice means surrendering something that we enjoy, something that is part of our lives, surrendering it as an offering to God, suggesting that we voluntarily give up something that we value for the sake of serving God and bringing God glory. So we might deny ourselves some pleasure, we might forego something that we enjoy, like perhaps we've all done during the period of Lent, and we make a sacrifice of something which I have to admit quite often is fairly trivial in our lives and doesn't really significantly affect our enjoyment of life. Anyway, sacrifice implies giving up something, so it is difficult to do. And when life is going really well and we praise and thank God, then the worship we offer God is not really much of a sacrifice, because we are really happy about the things that are going on in our lives. Everything's okay. Family life is okay, and work is okay, and relationships are okay, and we don't have major problems. So I don't think in that sort of context we can really bring a sacrifice of praise. For the people to whom the writer of the letter to the Hebrews is writing, if they're in a context of persecution, where perhaps their life is in real danger if they declare publicly their allegiance to Christ, then the praise that they offer publicly is sacrificial, because it could well have led to a great trouble, danger, persecution, and suffering. If we are struggling in our lives, if we are disappointed with the way things are working out, if we are feeling miserable, but we still choose to worship, then it's much more like sacrifice. What is this sacrifice of praise that the writer to the Hebrews talks about? He says, it is the fruit of lips that confess his name, the name of Christ. And so it's declaring our faith publicly in a context where it is dangerous to do so, or in a situation where personally there is not much cause for rejoicing in our own personal circumstances. What is the place of sacrifice in the lives of Christians in a reasonably free society today? It takes a bit of an effort to get up early to attend a church service, and one could glibly refer to that as a kind of a sacrifice, but generally speaking, we've weighed up the pros and cons, and we've decided that it is personally beneficial in some way to attend the church service. So we might have thought about the opportunity to worship together with other people, and that might have promised great joy and satisfaction. We might have thought about the message, the sermon, and sometimes we are really helped and encouraged. We get some insight, new insight into a truth. We might have thought about the fellowship that we'll enjoy with other people afterwards. And we might have thought about the sacrament itself, receiving Holy Communion. And so when we attend church, we attend because we believe that we're going to benefit in some way. That is not always true, of course, and sometimes we are really disappointed because we're unmoved by our experience of corporate worship. But so often people say, I feel such a sense of peace after I've been to a service, and I'm much more ready to begin another week. I feel much more kind of settled. And if I haven't gone to church, then I don't feel ready to face a new week and the rest of my life. So attending a church service is not really sacrificial because we stand to benefit in some way. It is good and it is satisfying, and perhaps a lot of the time we feel encouraged by that experience. If life is tough and I'm depressed, but I push myself to participate in public worship, then it is, as I've said, more like sacrifice. When we go to church and participate in worship, whether it's singing rousing old hymns or new songs, it's not really God's welfare that motivates us to get involved in church services and worship. We're not really thinking that our presence in church is going to greatly alter God's mood. It's really for our own benefit. It's not that we think, I'm going to church because I really want to cheer God up a bit. There's no guarantee that what we do in church is going to cheer God up. And does God need cheering up? I believe that God does enjoy his people gathering together to worship, but we worship really for our own benefit. And always, whenever we engage in any spiritual activity, we stand to benefit in some way. Any spiritual exercise that we undertake, it's for a reason. Even if we should fast, sometimes it's because we have an urgent prayer and we really want God to answer our prayer. And it might be that we want to feel closer to God, so we give up things, and so on and so forth. As I've said, if we are prepared to acknowledge God in a hostile environment, then it's much more like sacrifice. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews mentions two other sacrifices. There's the sacrifice of praise, and then he says, do not neglect to do good, and implies that that is a sacrifice. And then he says, do not neglect to share what you have, and that also is referred to as sacrifice. So we have three kinds of sacrifice: the sacrifice of praise, the sacrifice of doing good, and the sacrifice of sharing what we have with others. If it's not easy to do good and to share what we have, because we'd much rather focus on our own needs and desires and enjoy everything to ourselves, then doing good and sharing what we have require effort, and that implies sacrifice. One of my great heroes is William Wilberforce. He became totally absorbed with the issue of slavery. And he wrote, so enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the trade's wickedness appear, that my own mind was completely made for abolition. Let the consequences be what they may. I, from this time, determined that I would never rest until I had effected its abolition. According to an article in Christianity Today, the pathway to abolition was blocked by lots of things, by vested interests of a lot of people, slave owners in particular, parliamentary filibustering, entrenched bigotry, international politics, slave unrest, and political fear. And then for William Wilberforce, there was the added issue of his own health. He really struggled physically. No doubt his health suffered even more because of his tireless efforts to bring about the abolition of slavery. But in addition to being passionate about the issue of slavery and the need for it to be abolished, he gave away 1/4 of his annual income to the poor. He fought on behalf of chimney sweeps and single mothers and Sunday schools and orphans and juvenile delinquents. He helped found parachurch groups like the Society for Bettering the Cause of the Poor, the Church Missionary Society, the British and Foreign Bible Society, and the Anti-Slavery Society. If you ever watched the film Amazing Grace, then you would have gained the impression that Wilberforce was a reluctant politician because politics complicated his life, and his faith that was so vibrant, and his relationship with God. He was just caught up in such a spontaneous and wonderful and personal and intimate and enthusiastic relationship with God that getting involved in politics really made his relationship with God more complicated. So he couldn't indulge his own enjoyment of God in his simple prayers and enthusiastic day by day walk with God. He had to have strategies, and he had to cope with other politicians, and he had to talk cleverly, and he was very eloquent. And so he was, it seems, a reluctant politician, but he had to be persuaded that God was calling him into politics because God had really important work for him to do. And so definitely I would say that William Wilberforce offered sacrifices throughout his adult life anyway, that his life and his service and his involvement in society all smacked of renouncing things that he might personally prefer in order to help the cause of society, people out there. Now, I imagine that William Wilberforce got some joy and some pleasure and some satisfaction out of what he was doing, but a lot of the time it must have been extremely frustrating, and he must have felt like he was banging his head against a brick wall. But he did achieve significant things, and there must have been some reward in knowing finally, just before he died, that the abolition of slavery was brought into being through his efforts and other people's as well. But he must have derived some pleasure from the work that he did, and speaking passionately and turning the tide and seeing people's attitudes changed every now and again, and knowing that slaves would be free. So there was some reward, and he must have benefited personally, but nevertheless, his life was a life of sacrifice. Anything we do that benefits others, anything we do that takes us out of our comfort zone, anything we do that requires effort and commitment and perseverance is sacrifice. Anything that we give away when we'd actually rather keep it for our own enjoyment is sacrifice. Serving on a board or a committee might require making unpopular decisions and provoke hostility. That can be sacrificial. Holding to our principles and our values, despite opposition and criticism, misunderstanding and abuse sometimes, is sacrifice. At best, though, our motives always are a bit tainted by self-interest. As long as we benefit in some way, some small way, from anything we do, even if it's just feeling pleased with ourselves and what we've accomplished, means our motives are not completely selfless and not completely pure. But that doesn't really matter. That is the nature of being human, that in fact we have this inbuilt desire to look after ourselves and to do what is in our best interests. And although we blow it sometimes horribly, we have that sort of self-preservation aim and intention and goal and motivation. So I would argue that nothing we do is completely altruistic and pure in motive. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. As individuals, we are a mixed bag. We're a confused combination of opposites. Hopefully, we try to do our best, and our best includes much that is really beneficial to others. The fact that we get a good feeling about the good we do doesn't negate the good that we do. Sometimes fulfilling a commitment, just doing our duty, especially when we are not particularly excited about it, is sacrificial. And we live in an age where we are so often governed by that sort of motto, just do it. If it's something that grabs you, if it's something you feel like doing, if it's something that appeals to you, if it's something you want, then grab it, then do it, then so much is all about the individual. And that's a real danger, because we need to accept responsibility. There is no freedom without acceptance of responsibility. We need to fulfill our duties. All of us have duties. And we need to give of ourselves if we're going to be fulfilled. So we don't have to wait for the Holy Spirit to prompt us and to spur us on to love and good deeds. Because we know what is pleasing to God. We know what will bring God joy and pleasure. And we have mentioned three of those things today. We've talked about the sacrifice of praise. When life is tough, if we can still believe and worship, and even though we might be struggling really with kind of black clouds of depression and not knowing and doubt and anxiety and fear, if we can continue nevertheless, then what we're offering to God is a sacrifice. And then there were two other sacrifices we mentioned. Do not neglect to do good, and do not neglect to share with others. And so the encouragement today is to think about the role of sacrifice in our lives, and to combine that with looking after ourselves and doing what's good for us and what we enjoy doing and what is for our own personal benefit. But sometimes we're called to just kind of go a bit beyond that and to do what we can for others. I guess that my preparation of these weekly talks involves a bit of sacrifice, because I have to be disciplined enough to prepare in advance, to read the text and to think about what I'm going to say and to get a theme for my talk. And of course, I could be doing other things sometimes, but I benefit from this, as I've said to you before, from having to mull things over and work out what I want to say. And I often find that what I'm saying is applicable to me, first and foremost, apart from anybody else. And the fact that I sometimes get some feedback from you, and that you actually can be bothered to listen to me, that you say that you benefit in some way from listening to what I have to say, that is really good, and I feel presenting a weekly message is not entirely devoid of personal benefit. Nevertheless, God calls us to duty and responsibility and sacrifice, and looking beyond ourselves and doing what we can for the sake of other people and making a difference. And we each have our own way of doing that, and we need to find out what it is that we can do, in what way God has gifted us that enables us to really help other people out there. And sometimes it might be that we are, just cheerful and encouraging people, and we kind of just by our words and our presence and being good-natured, we spur people on. Everything we do, because we are human and we are, as I've said, tainted, everything we do is a struggle, really. Somebody was just saying to me the other day, that he tries hard not to be bad-tempered and grumpy in a relatively old age, and I could gel with that, because we have to make an effort always not to be tied to our feelings, our irritations, our petty feelings, but to be able to overcome those and to not be false, but to present something much more patient and tolerant and understanding, and so we're all involved in a struggle, and it goes on moment by moment and day by day, and I guess we sacrifice what we're really feeling and what we really want to do for the sake of appearing to be, trying to be reasonable people, pleasant to be with, good company. So may God encourage us in our own journeys and make us aware of this need to sacrifice in some way from time to time for the good of other people. May God bless you. Amen.